Okay, well, I'm just going to continue on. That video just kind of cut off on this slide. So, back to the comparison of polytheism versus pantheism. So, Hinduism has many gods, however, it is not a polytheist religion. And here's why. Hinduism is what we call pantheistic. And it's pantheistic because pantheism is the belief that everything is part of one God. So polytheism believes that there are many different gods, whereas pantheism believes that everything is part of one God. So if you take a look at this quote over here, it says, "You are the universe expressing itself as a human for a little while." So if you were a religion that looked at the universe as God, you would be an expression of God as a human. That's an example of pantheistic. Another way to think about pantheism is to, let's just say God represents the figure of a human. Okay. Then the cells of the body, or fingers, or the hairs, etc., would be us. So pantheism is the belief that everything is part of one God. Okay. So to elaborate on that idea, that would mean that if we're looking at that human illustration again, that maybe the fingernails might be the oceans, maybe the hair might be the humans, etc. But the whole idea here is that the whole entity in pantheism, people, the world, earth, planets, etc., it's all part of one God. If that was confusing at all, please ask me to clarify that, and I will certainly bring that up in person with you. So, anyway, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism developed out of Hinduism. So, it was Hinduism first, and then it branched off into several other religions. Okay, these religions that ultimately branched off of Hinduism are referred to as the Dharmic religions. So while all of this is happening in the East and in the Arabian Peninsula and in Asia and in Europe, in the West, some of the religious followings that we follow along, right, in the European West, amongst these traditions of multiple gods, um, monotheism is established. And as you could probably surmise, monotheism is referring to one God as opposed to many gods in polytheism. So it's a belief in only one God. Jewish people started believing in the actions of people: Adam, Abraham, Moses, and David. So these are some major figures in the Old Testament that Judaism follows. Okay, so the Old Testament. So this essentially what happens: these stories were spread and recorded in the Old Testament. It tells the story of Jewish people and at the time their belief system and belief structure. You can see here the breakdown of the Old Testament: 17 books of history, 5 books of law, 12 books of history, 15 books of wisdom, poetry, and praise, 17 books of prophecy. And that's just in the Old Testament, right? And that's where the origins of Judaism arise from. So, some people say, well, what about philosophy and science? So, basically, from a philosophical standpoint, there was a whole bunch of these Greek and Mediterranean thinkers. And what they did is they ultimately moved away from belief in gods and they replaced this thought process with science and created agnosticism. And agnosticism is essentially an uncertainty about God or gods. So we move from this absolute fundamental belief in polyism and monotheism to agnosticism, which is like totally counterculture at the time because it goes away from an absolute belief in God. And then we also have atheism, so a belief in no gods. So agnosticism is really an uncertainty about God or gods and wanting to evaluate different forms of thinking, philosophy, and science. And atheism really is a belief in no God. It's important to clarify that just because you follow philosophy and are into philosophy or science, it doesn't mean that you're agnostic or atheism or atheist. Okay, so you can believe in philosophy and science and still be, follow a particular religion. So Jesus and Muhammad. So 2,000 years ago, a Jewish teacher named Jesus was executed. Okay, he's approximately 2,000 years ago. His followers claim he was resurrected and began teaching about his life. This became known as the New Testament and gave rise to Christianity. Of course, this is a super quick overview, and we're going to get into this a lot more detail when we start studying Christianity. Now, 600 AD, Muhammad, later known as the Prophet Muhammad, claimed he received words directly from God. Muhammad recorded these words, these inspired words of God, in the Quran. Ultimately, the followers of become Islam as a religion. So, today's task, I will now tell you in person. Okay, thanks for listening to this presentation. Much appreciated.